story titled Her Husband Came Back as a Goat, strange things started happening. This is the story of Ruth Adewale, a woman whose tears soaked the earth of Lagos for weeks after her husband's death. She had loved Michael, not just because he was her husband, but because he was her soul, the man who believed she could rise above poverty, who sold his only car so she could open her restaurant by the market. But on a dark Tuesday evening, everything shattered. The rain had not stopped since morning. The streets were silent, apart from the tapping of raindrops against iron roofs. Ruth sat alone in her small living room, holding Michael's photo, the one they took at Elagushi Beach last December. He was smiling, sand on his feet, his arm wrapped around her waist. Her lips trembled. It had been 2 months since the accident that took him. At least, that's what the police called it, an accident. But Ruth knew in her bones that it wasn't. She had seen the tire marks, the angle of the car, the blood on the driver's side door. It didn't feel right. Michael had been careful, too careful to crash that way. That night, she couldn't sleep. She walked outside barefoot into the cold rain. The moon hid behind clouds, and the wind whispered to the banana trees behind her compound. Then she heard it, a sound, a soft bleat. Bah! Ruth frowned. Who keeps a goat out here at midnight? She took a step forward. Another bleat, closer this time. When lightning flashed, she saw it. A black goat standing by the gate, rain glistening on its fur. It didn't move. It just stood there, staring straight at her. Something about the eyes made her freeze. They were brown, deep human-like, exactly like Michael's eyes. She shook her head. No, Ruth, you're losing it. You need sleep. But when she turned to go back inside, the goat followed her, step for step, until it stood by her door, still watching. For the next few days, the goat stayed. It didn't eat grass like the others. It waited for her by the porch every morning, followed her to the market, and sometimes bleated softly when she cried. The neighbors started talking. That widow has gone mad, one woman whispered, talking to a goat like it's her husband. But Ruth didn't care. There was something strange, comforting about the animal. Sometimes, when she prayed at night, it sat quietly outside her window, listening. And once, when she said, "Michael, I wish you were here," the goat scratched the ground twice, something Michael used to do when thinking. Coincidence, maybe, but her heart didn't think so. One evening, Ruth visited Michael's grave. The sun was setting, and the wind carried the smell of wet earth. The goat followed her all the way to the cemetery. She placed flowers on the grave. Tears ran down her face. "I miss you, Michael," she whispered. "They said it was an accident, but my heart says someone killed you." At that moment, the goat suddenly stomped its hoof hard. Then it turned its head sharply toward the road. Ruth looked up. A car was parked there. Black SUV, tinted windows. The same type of car that Michael had driven the night he died. The goat bleated furiously, as if warning her. Then the SUV engine started, and the vehicle sped off into the distance. Her heart pounded. Could it be the same person who killed Michael watching her now? That night, Ruth couldn't shake off the feeling. The goat slept by her window again. And around 2 a.m., she woke up suddenly. There was a noise. Footsteps on the gravel outside. Ruth held her breath and peeked through the curtain. A man was standing in her yard, tall in a dark jacket. He held something. It glinted under the moonlight. A gun. Ruth's heart stopped. The goat bleated loudly. Bah! Bah! Charging at the man before he could move. The man stumbled back, cursed, and ran out through the gate. The goat chased him halfway down the street before returning, panting heavily. Ruth stood frozen, tears in her eyes. She dropped to her knees beside the goat. You saved me." The animal looked at her again with those same deep, familiar eyes. For the first time, she whispered, trembling, "Michael, is that you?" The next morning, she visited the police. She told them about the man, the car, the strange goat that always appeared when she was in danger. The officer laughed. "Madam, please, don't let grief deceive you. Goats don't chase armed robbers." Ruth left in silence. But as she walked home through the market street, something strange happened. An old woman selling herbs stopped her. "My daughter," she said, "that goat you walk with is not ordinary. It carries a restless spirit." Ruth's blood ran cold. "A spirit?" The old woman nodded. "When a person dies unjustly, sometimes the spirit finds a way back, not to live again, but to seek truth." Ruth swallowed hard. "Then, if it's him, what does he want?" The woman's eyes narrowed. "Justice. Until the killer is exposed, he won't rest." That night, the rain returned. Ruth sat with the goat near the fire behind her kitchen. She stared into its eyes and whispered, "Michael, if it's really you, show me who did this to you." The goat blinked slowly, then stood up. It walked to the backyard gate, stopped, and looked back at her. Then it began walking down the path toward the main road. Ruth followed, trembling, holding a lantern. They walked for nearly half an hour, through muddy alleys, past sleeping houses, until they reached a large compound. Ruth's breath caught. She knew this place. It was the house of Daniel, Michael's business partner, the same man who had been oddly quiet at the funeral. The goat stopped by Daniel's gate and began scraping its hooves violently on the ground. Ruth's heart raced. Could Daniel have something to do with Michael's death? Just then, a voice came from behind the gate. "Who's there?" Ruth froze. It was Daniel's voice. The goat bleated loudly, twice, "Bah, bah," then looked straight at her, as if saying, "Now you know." Ruth turned and ran back home, shaking all over. She didn't sleep that night. Memories flooded her mind. Daniel arguing with Michael about money, the way he avoided her calls after the funeral, the expensive new car he suddenly bought. Could it really be him? The next morning, she went back to the herb woman. "What should I do?" she asked. "If it's true, if that man killed my husband?" The woman's eyes darkened. Truth must come to light. But be careful. When a spirit demands justice, it won't stop until it's done, even if it burns everything around it. That night, Ruth decided to test it. She took a photo of Daniel and Michael together from an old album and showed it to the goat. The animal's reaction was instant. It jumped back, bleated furiously, and kicked over the lantern. Ruth gasped, "Michael, it's him, isn't it?" The goat stopped, stared at her, and nodded slightly, just one slow movement of the head. Her knees weakened. She fell to the floor, sobbing, "Michael, I'll find the truth. I swear I will." As the night deepened, thunder rolled in the distance. The goat lay by the door, watching her as she cried herself to sleep. Outside, the rain washed away footprints, but not fate, because tomorrow Ruth would make a decision that would change everything. And that was the night her dead husband truly began to speak. Night still clung to Lagos like smoke after fire. The street outside Ruth's home smelled of wet dust and diesel. Police tape fluttered in the wind. Inside, she sat by the lamp, her hands trembling around a cup of tea she hadn't tasted. For the first time in months, she thought it was over. Daniel was behind bars. The lies were finished. But peace, real peace, was a fragile thing in her world. It never stayed long. She kept glancing toward the corner where the goat used to sleep. Only an empty mat now. Sometimes, in the faint hum of night traffic, she thought she could still hear its hooves. And every time she did, a strange comfort settled over her chest. That morning, a soft knock came at the door. Ruth opened it to find Inspector Tund, the officer who'd helped her after the attack. "Madam Ruth," he said quietly, removing his cap, "we confirmed your evidence. Daniel will be charged with conspiracy and attempted murder." Ruth's lips trembled into a smile. "Thank you, officer." But Tund paused. "We think he's not working alone. There's money moving. Someone's paying his legal fees in secret. You should be careful." The word careful hit her like cold water. She nodded slowly. "I understand." That evening, as the city dimmed, Ruth reopened her restaurant. Customers trickled in, neighbors who had once whispered about her, now smiling kindly. The smell of jollof rice filled the air. Children laughed outside. For a moment, life felt almost normal. But when she stepped behind the counter, she froze. A single folded paper lay on the counter beside the till. No one had seen who left it. She opened it. For words were scrawled in red ink. He is not alone. Her hand went cold. She looked around. The faces in her restaurant suddenly strange, unfamiliar. Anyone could have left it. Anyone could be watching. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, clutching the note. Rain started to fall. Soft at first, then fierce, drumming on the roof like a warning. And just when she thought the storm had reached its loudest, she heard it. A faint tap at the back door. 3 taps. Slow, deliberate. Ruth's throat tightened. She grabbed a lantern and walked toward the kitchen. Who's there? Silence. Then the tap came again, 3 times. Her fingers shook as she unlatched the door. The wind blew in, cold and sharp. No one stood there, only a muddy footprint. Human, bare. She bolted the door, her heart racing. And that's when she noticed it, on the wall near the floor, drawn in wet mud, a symbol, the same triangle-shaped mark Michael used to sign on his workshop tools. Her breath caught. "Michael?" she whispered into the dark. But the wind only answered with a long, low whistle. She sat down on the floor, clutching her chest. If this was a warning, she would face it. If it was a message, she would listen. By dawn, the rain had stopped. She took the muddy paper, the footprints photo, and the envelope of documents, and left for the police station. On the way, a man on a motorcycle slowed beside her. "Madam Ruth," he said under his breath. "Daniel send greetings." She turned. But the bike sped off before she could respond. Her knees went weak. She reached the station gates trembling, clutching her files tighter. Inside, Inspector Tunn frowned as he heard her story. "This is serious," he said. "I'll assign 2 men to watch your house. But please don't walk alone." Ruth nodded, but fear had already slipped into her heart like smoke in the cloth. It clung, invisible yet heavy. That night, as she locked up her restaurant, she saw a man standing across the road, tall, still, watching. When she blinked, he was gone. And somewhere in the darkness of Kirikiri prison, Daniel dialed a number with a trembling hand. A voice answered, "Yes, boss." Daniel whispered, "She's still breathing. Fix that mistake." Days turned into weeks, but Ruth's fear never left. She smiled for her customers, cooked their meals, laughed with her children, but deep down, every sound behind her back made her flinch. Every shadow made her heart beat louder. Sometimes at night, she dreamed of the goat again. She'd see it standing in the courtyard, its eyes glowing gold, its horns curved like a crown. It never spoke, only stared. And when she woke, she'd find her door open, even though she'd locked it the night before. She started writing letters to Michael. Not real letters, just folded papers where she poured her fear. "I know you're watching," she wrote. "If you can see me, give me a sign." One evening, as she closed the restaurant, she heard laughter from the alley. Not the kind of laughter that warms your heart, but one that chills the bone. When she turned, she saw 2 men standing near the bins. One was bald. The other wore a dark hoodie. The bald man smiled. "Evening, madam. Good food today." "Thank you," Ruth said, trying to sound calm. The man in the hoodie stepped forward. "Boss sends greetings." Ruth's face drained of color. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't worry," the bald one said, pulling a folded cloth from his pocket. "You'll remember soon." Before she could move, the hooded man splashed something at her. A sharp, burning pain shot through her face. Acid. She screamed and stumbled back, but the liquid had missed her skin by inches. It hit the metal door instead, hissing and smoking. A car horn blared nearby, and the men fled into the shadows. Neighbors rushed out at the sound of her scream. One of them, old Mama Keiji, helped her inside. "My daughter," she said, trembling. "This city is wicked. You must leave before they finish what they started." But Ruth shook her head. "No, Mama. If I run, they win." She sat by the kitchen table, breathing heavily. Her hands shook as she stared at the acid-burnt metal door. And there, on the edge of the doorframe, half melted, half burnt, was that same triangular mark. Michael's mark. Her tears fell silently. The next morning, Inspector Tun visited again. "We caught one of the men," he said. He confessed. Daniel paid him through a woman, his lawyer. They were planning to make it look like a robbery. Ruth's jaw clenched. "And the woman?" Tun sighed. "She's missing." The words hit her like a stone. Missing meant someone had erased her, or she was running for her life. That night, the wind was restless. Ruth tried to sleep, but her mind kept replaying the scene. The burning door, the hissing acid, the laughter. She whispered, "Michael, if you're still with me, help me end this." And then she heard it again. The sound of hooves. Slow, calm, moving outside her window. She froze. She stepped closer and pulled the curtain aside. There it was, the goat, standing in the moonlight, staring straight at her window. Its eyes were wet, reflecting light like tears. Her breath caught in her throat. "Michael," she whispered. The goat turned and began walking toward the old road behind the house, the one leading to the abandoned factory, where Michael used to work. Something deep inside her told her to follow. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped out quietly. The night air was thick and heavy. The city had gone to sleep, except for the hum of distant generators and the occasional bark of a stray dog. The goat led the way, its hooves making soft thuds on the wet ground. Every few steps, it stopped and looked back, as if making sure she was still following. Finally, it stopped in front of the factory gate. Rust had eaten through the metal. Vines crept along the walls. Ruth hesitated. "Why here?" The goat looked at her once more, then vanished into shadows. Inside the factory, the smell of oil and metal hung in the air. Moonlight filtered through broken windows, casting long lines across the dusty floor. Ruth's steps echoed as she walked deeper inside. Then she heard voices, 2 of them. "Daniel wants her gone by tomorrow," a man said. "The lawyers already handled the papers. Once we're done, they'll burn the place." Her heart stopped. They were here, Daniel's men. She ducked behind a crate, her breath shallow. She could see their outlines, one tall, one stocky. Standing by a black bag, she needed proof. Quietly, she took out her phone and began recording. Then the tall man's voice grew closer. "Wait, you hear something?" Ruth froze. The sound of her phone's tiny vibration broke the silence. The battery warning beeped. Both men turned their heads. "There!" the tall one shouted, pulling a gun. Ruth ran. Bullets cracked the air behind her, sparks flying from the metal beams. She ducked under a table, crawled through a narrow passage, and burst into the open yard. The men followed, their footsteps thundering behind her. Then, suddenly, a shadow moved across the yard. The goat. It darted across the path, right between the men, bleating loudly. Startled, one of them tripped over a loose pipe and fired accidentally. The bullet hit the other man in the leg. Ruth didn't wait. She ran, gasping, clutching her phone like her life depended on it. By the time she reached the main road, her legs were trembling. A passing taxi stopped. "Madam, you okay?" the driver asked. She climbed in, shaking. "Police station. Fast." At the station, she played the recording for Inspector Tun. Voices, gunfire, Daniel's name. Tun's face hardened. "This is enough. We'll reopen his case and extend his sentence. You've done well, madam." But Ruth only looked out the window, her eyes wet, because in her heart she knew this wasn't over. 3 nights later, Lego City trembled under a heavy storm. Lightning split the sky in silver veins, thunder rolling like drums of war. And inside her small house, Ruth sat by the window, exhausted, yet unable to sleep. Every flash of lightning painted the walls in ghostly white. She could almost see Michael's shadow in every corner. Her lips moved silently. "Tell me what to do next, my love." The rain answered, soft at first, then furious. And beneath it, she heard a sound she would never forget. A low bleat. The goat. It was back. She grabbed her lantern and stepped outside. The rain slapped her face, cold and sharp, but she didn't care. The goat stood across the road, soaked, eyes glistening in the lightning. It turned and began to walk slowly toward the old Kirikiri Road, the same route leading to prison. Ruth's heart pounded. The message was clear. This ends tonight. She followed in silence. Mud splashed beneath her feet. The storm howled around her. The goat stopped once, looked back, then disappeared into the shadow of an abandoned warehouse. Ruth hesitated. Fear gnawed at her chest, but she stepped inside. The smell of gasoline and rust filled her nose. Rain leaked from the ceiling, dripping on metal drums and old tools. Then she saw it, a faint light flickering deeper inside. A voice came from the dark. Ruth. Her blood froze. Daniel. He was thinner now, but his eyes burned with the same poison as before. His prison uniform hung loose, wet from the storm. He was free. He'd escaped. You thought you could bury me? He sneered. You thought a woman like you could destroy me? Ruth took a step back. Daniel, the police will... Police? He laughed. Half of them work for me. You think I survived Lagos business without buying a few souls? He raised a gun, glistening under the flickering light. Tonight, I finished what I started. Her mind raced. The exit was blocked. She looked around. Pipes, chains, broken crates. Nothing useful. Her hand trembled as she reached for her phone, but Daniel noticed. Don't, he warned. You'll only make it slower. And then something moved in the shadows behind him. A faint sound. Hooves. Daniel frowned. What the... The goat stepped out, dripping wet, its horns gleaming like polished steel. It let out a low, deep bleat that echoed through the warehouse. Daniel laughed nervously. You brought your little pet? How cute. He aimed his gun, but before he could shoot, the goat charged. It slammed into his chest, the gun flying from his hand. Daniel crashed into a pile of metal sheets, groaning. Ruth didn't think. She ran to the gun. But Daniel was faster. He grabbed her ankle, pulling her down. You can't win, he shouted. You're nothing without me. She kicked, fighting to break free, her fingers inches from the gun. Then lightning flashed, the goat charged again, and this time Daniel lost his grip. Ruth seized the gun, trembling, pointing it straight at him. Don't move. Daniel froze, his eyes wide. You won't shoot me. You're too soft. Her hand shook. Tears mixed with rain on her cheeks. I buried my husband once, she whispered. Don't make me bury you too. For a long second, neither moved. Then, from the corner of the room, another flash of lightning revealed something behind Daniel. A figure, tall, still, familiar. Michael, not his body, just a shadow shaped like him, standing behind Daniel. The same triangle mark glowed faintly on the wall. Daniel turned, gasping, What is that? Ruth's voice broke. Justice. The shadow moved. Daniel stumbled backward, and his foot slipped on a broken pipe. He fell hard, crashing into a pool of water, and a live wire from the ceiling dropped straight into it. Sparks exploded. Daniel screamed. And then there was silence. The storm began to fade. Ruth stood still, breathing heavily, her face pale in the dim light. The goat walked toward her, calm, unafraid. It looked up at her with eyes that felt too human to be real. For a moment, she saw Michael in them, kind, forgiving, at peace. She knelt down, touching its forehead gently. Thank you, she whispered. The goat blinked once, and when she looked again, it was gone. Only the muddy hoofprints remained, leading toward the open door and the rising dawn. When the police arrived later, they found Daniel's body, the burnt wire, and Ruth sitting quietly by the door, clutching her late husband's mark in her palm. Inspector Tunn placed a hand on her shoulder. It's over, madam. But Ruth only smiled faintly. No, she said softly. It's just peace. Weeks later, her restaurant reopened, brighter, busier, full of laughter again. People whispered about her bravery, about the mysterious goat that saved her life. But Ruth never spoke of it. Every evening, she lit a candle beside Michael's picture, set a bowl of water near the door, and whispered, For the soul that never left me alone. And sometimes, when the wind passed through the alley just right, the sound of gentle hooves echoed softly in the night. Not haunting, but watching, guarding. The storm was gone, but love had never left. When a storm ends, it doesn't leave silence, it leaves echoes that never fade. The dawn after Daniel's death was slow and heavy. The sky over Surulere was pale gray, the streets washed clean by rain. And in a small yellow-painted house, Ruth Adewale sat beside her window, staring at the world that suddenly felt too quiet. The police had come and gone. The reporters had stopped calling. The city had moved on. But Ruth's heart was still learning how to beat again. Every morning she walked to the restaurant, Ruth's corner kitchen, the one she and Michael had built with their dreams. The signboard was still cracked from the storm. Inside, the chairs were neatly arranged, the smell of pepper soup and roasted yam filling the air. Her new helper, Amaka, a 22-year-old with shy eyes, worked silently beside her. They didn't talk much, but Amaka always made sure Ruth ate before customers came. "Auntie Ruth," she would say softly, "you've done enough for the day." And Ruth would only smile, tired but thankful. It had been 40 days since that night. 40 days since the goat had vanished. 40 days since she'd whispered goodbye to the man who once came back to protect her. But grief doesn't vanish. It lingers like a soft ache under the ribs, like a song that never ends. One afternoon, while rearranging old files in the restaurant's backroom, Ruth found a sealed brown envelope she'd never noticed before. It was tucked behind a framed photo of her and Michael, the one from their first anniversary. The handwriting on it was familiar, Michael's. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a folded letter. "My Ruth, if you're reading this, it means I never came home. Don't cry too much for me. I know the city will test you, but you are stronger than you think. Whatever happens, protect the restaurant. It carries both our dreams. And if ever you feel alone, look for the signs. I'll be where peace waits for you. Michael." Ruth pressed the letter to her chest. Tears fell silently onto the paper. She could almost hear his voice again, calm, gentle, full of love. That night, she walked to the rooftop of her building. Lagos lights shimmered below like scattered fireflies. She closed her eyes, whispering, "Michael, I found your letter. I'll keep your dream alive." And from somewhere far, maybe memory, maybe faith, a soft wind brushed against her face. Warm, familiar. She smiled. For the first time, she didn't cry. Weeks turned into months. The restaurant began to thrive again. Customers returned, not just for the food, but for her calmness. There was something about Ruth now, strength mixed with peace, that made people feel safe. One rainy morning, a man in a brown jacket walked in. He looked about 35, tired but kind. He ordered coffee and rice. Ruth served him quietly. After eating, he walked up to her counter. "You run this place alone?" "Mostly," she replied with a small smile. "Your food reminds me of my mother's," he said. "I'm David, by the way." "Ruth," she answered. David became a regular. At first, he came for the food, then for the quiet, then for her. He never asked about her past, never tried to fix her pain. He just sat near the window, sometimes reading, sometimes helping Amaka close shop. And slowly, gently, he began to feel the silence that Michael had left behind. One afternoon, Inspector Tunn stopped by the restaurant. He looked older, but his smile was kind as ever. "Madam Ruth," he said, sitting down, "you're a hard woman to find." "I'm right here," she laughed softly. "You've done well," he said, sipping his drink. "The city still talks about your courage." Ruth looked down. "I didn't want to be known for that night." "I know," Tunn said quietly. "But sometimes life writes our story for us." He stood up to leave, then paused. "By the way, I heard something strange," he said. "The warehouse where Daniel died. It's being rebuilt into a shelter for women. The owner said an anonymous donor paid for everything." Ruth's eyes lifted. "Anonymous?" Tunn nodded. "Yes. Someone signed the papers as M.A. Foundation. Does that name mean anything to you?" She smiled faintly. "Maybe it does," she whispered. A year passed. Ruth's corner kitchen expanded into 2 more branches, one in Acacia, one in Yaba. But success didn't make her proud. It made her humble. Every achievement reminded her of what she had lost and what she had survived. She hired women who had faced abuse or abandonment. She trained them, paid them fairly, gave them purpose. No one should ever have to beg for respect, she told them, and they loved her for it. One evening, as she closed the shop, David walked in holding a small white box. He smiled shyly. "You've been working too hard," he said. "That's how I stay alive," she teased. "Maybe you should try living too," he replied softly. He opened the box. Inside was a silver chain with a small goat-shaped charm. Ruth froze, her breath catching. "Where did you—" "I found it in an artisan's shop," he said. "It reminded me of strength." Ruth touched the charm, tears glistening in her eyes. It wasn't fear this time. It was gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. That night, she dreamt of Michael, standing by a field of light, smiling. He said nothing, just looked at her, peaceful. And behind him, the goat grazed quietly. When she woke, her heart felt lighter than it had in years. Months later, Ruth was invited to speak at the opening of the new shelter, the one built where Daniel had died. She stood at the podium, the crowd quiet. "People say the past should be forgotten," she began, voice steady. "But I believe the past teaches us how to live again. I lost everything, my husband, my peace, my trust in people. But life found a way to return all of it in new form." The crowd clapped softly. She continued, "Sometimes love doesn't end. It just changes shape. And even when the body is gone, the spirit finds a way to protect what it loves." David stood at the back, watching her, proud, admiring. Ruth looked at him and smiled. After the ceremony, she placed a small white candle near the shelter's entrance. On it, she engraved a simple letter, M. As she lit it, a soft wind blew through the courtyard, carrying the scent of rain and roasted yam. Somewhere in the distance, she thought she heard a faint bleat. Ruth closed her eyes. "Rest now," she whispered. "I'm fine." And for the first time since the storm, her heart truly believed it. When pain is too deep, love doesn't disappear. It transforms. Ruth's story isn't about death, it's about rebirth. Because sometimes the ones we lose never really leave us. They live on in every act of courage, in every breath of peace. Soft piano fades out. Screen darkens, then shows a text. Inspired by true emotions. Written for the broken who healed. They say time heals everything. But the truth is, time only teaches us how to live with the scars. It had been 3 years since the night the storm took Daniel and gave Ruth her peace. 3 long years of rebuilding, forgiving, learning to smile again. Legos had changed, new buildings, new noise, new faces. But inside Ruth's corner kitchen, something timeless remained. The smell of jollof rice, the laughter of women who had once been broken, and Ruth's calm presence, steady as morning light. Ruth now wore her hair shorter, streaks of gray shining softly. Her steps were slower, but her smile carried warmth that healed others. She lived quietly, splitting her time between the restaurant and the women's shelter, the MA Foundation. Every weekend, she visited the shelter to teach cooking and life skills. The girls there called her Mama Ruth. "Mama, how do you stay so strong?" One of them, F, asked one day. Ruth smiled. "Strength is not loud, my dear. It's the way you stand up again when no one's watching." David had become part of her routine. Not rushing her, not forcing anything. He simply stayed. They shared quiet dinners, late walks, and sometimes sat in silence watching the Lagos Lagoon shimmer at sunset. He understood her silence, and she understood his patience. "You don't talk much about him," David said one evening, as they watched the sunset from Freedom Park. "Some things don't need words," Ruth said softly. "Does it still hurt?" "Sometimes," she smiled, "but pain changes shape. Now it feels like gratitude." David reached for her hand. "Then maybe it's time to live again." She didn't pull away. She just nodded, eyes glistening in the dying light. The date was June 12th, Michael's birthday. Every year, Ruth marked it quietly. No parties, no tears. Just a small candle, a bowl of water, and the same word she always whispered. Wherever you are, thank you for never leaving me. But that morning, something was different. When she stepped outside her house, a small white goat stood near the gate. Clean, calm, eyes bright as glass. Ruth froze. Her breath caught. For a second, the city noise faded. Only the heartbeat in her chest remained. "It can't be," she whispered. The goat stared at her for a long moment, then walked slowly toward the old path leading to Michael's grave. She followed. Her legs trembled, her chest tight with old memories. The graveyard was quiet, sunlight filtering through tall trees. When she reached his grave, the goat was standing beside it, motionless. Her knees gave way. She knelt in front of the marble stone. Michael Adewale, beloved husband, gone too soon. Her hand traced a name carved in stone. Tears filled her eyes, but her lips curved into a smile. "You kept your promise," she whispered. "You said you'd watch over me." The goat lowered its head gently, almost like a bow, and then it turned and slowly walked away, disappeared behind the trees. Ruth didn't follow. She didn't need to. She knew this was the last visit, the last goodbye. That night, Ruth dreamed again, the kind of dream that feels more real than waking. She stood in a bright open field. The air smelled of rain and new earth. Michael stood before her, smiling. He looked young again, wearing the same shirt he had the day they first opened the restaurant. Behind him, the goat grazed peacefully in the light. "You kept your word," Ruth said softly. "So did you," he smiled. "Was it really you all this time?" "Does it matter?" he said. "You believed." That's what gave it meaning. She stepped closer, tears streaming. "I miss you." He nodded. "I know, but you're not alone anymore." He looked over her shoulder, where David stood, waiting, smiling gently. "Love doesn't end, Ruth. It just changes hands." Then he reached out, touched her forehead, and whispered, "Live well, my heart." And before she could answer, the field filled with golden light. Ruth woke with sunlight on her face. For the first time in years, there was no heaviness in her chest, only calm. That evening, she visited the restaurant. The crowd was cheerful, the music soft, the smell of grilled plantain filling the air. She stood by the counter, watching everyone laugh, eat, live. Then she smiled, truly smiled, and whispered to herself, "You did it, Michael. We did it." A few weeks later, she and David hosted a small gathering. Not a wedding, not yet. Just a celebration of life after pain. At the center of the restaurant, Ruth placed a white candle with a silver goat charm tied around it. When David asked why, she said simply, "To remind me that love never dies. It just finds new ways to return home." As the night ended, Ruth stepped outside alone. The city hummed softly. Taxis, laughter, music in the distance. She looked up at the sky, cloudy but calm, and whispered, "Good night, my love." Then, as she turned to go back inside, something made her stop. Across the road, under the streetlight, stood a white goat, still, quiet, watching her. Its eyes glowed faintly, not bright, not strange, just peaceful. A faint breeze brushed her face, carrying the scent of roasted yam and rain. Ruth smiled. "One last time," she whispered. The goat blinked, slowly, then turned and walked away into the night. And just before it disappeared around the corner, a white handkerchief fluttered down onto the wet pavement. Ruth bent down, picked it up, and froze. Embroidered on the corner were two small letters, M.A., her husband's initials. She clutched it to her chest, eyes closing, tears of peace streaming down her face. "Rest now," she whispered. "I'm home." Grief does not end when a person dies. It ends when the living finally forgive the past. Ruth learned that healing isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering without pain.